if you're not explicitly anti this ideology, you will fall to it. Um, but you have a unique background that I want to tap into a little bit because you've read. I think a lot of people are wondering what happened because for a lot of people this seems like it suddenly happened, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
it
not
did
that's
in
not the
some
case.
sense, but there was groundwork that was laid everywhere, and it was pretty extensive groundwork. Um,
Hmm.
can you talk about why that is so people can understand that like people did not go from sudden like enlightenment individualists in February to super woke anti-individualist Marxists in July? That's not what happened.
No, it's not. I mean, there's a number of ways we could try to approach that point. Of course, it's a very difficult point to communicate. I've been trying to communicate it for years and not succeeding. So maybe this won't work, but we'll try. The filmmaker who's been working with us about the grievance studies affair and is making a full-length documentary on it has a metaphor about trees. And he says, you can think of society as living in the canopy of a tree, and the tree that we've implanted for the entire of the modern era is like the liberal tree. And, Enlightenment liberalism, when I say that, I mean like Scottish liberalism and science. So what was stuck into the American experiment, the Constitution and Bill of Rights and Declaration are examples of founding documents in that line of thought. So we've all lived in the liberal tree, and the liberal tree has a number of expectations. People know what living in that tree is like. We have to accept criticism from people to a degree. We try to give people the benefit of the doubt in their argument. We try to not be unduly rude to people, although rudeness is allowed. We try to hold a ethic of not being unfairly rude to people. We try to minimize uh, things like discrimination and so on. So there's certain rules, and everybody's comfortable living in this tree, and it has this fruit. Well, in the last 100 years, starting with a couple of, you basically kind of ended up having a handful of sort of mad scientists, genetic engineers in the tree who started to build a genetically modified version of the liberal tree that we could call critical social justice now. Some of the earlier experiments were called critical theory. Later, they developed postmodernism. And I would say that the postmodern side is, in some ways, more indicative of how we need to describe the thing going forward, even though critical theory is the solvent, the powerful engine that's the problem. So they planted this postmodern tree next to the modern tree that its canopy is liberalism. And they engineered it so that it would look very similar and grow very closely, literally parasitically, off of the liberal tree. And so now this thing has been growing since the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and has got to the point, and with the critical theory back to the 1920s. So this thing has grown to a fully mature tree. It's producing fruit. The fruit looks similar to the liberal tree. And so people who lived in the liberal tree have been kind of going back and forth between the two twin canopies, not really realizing that there's two cultures happening at once. So they've taken in a lot of this other culture, eaten a lot of that fruit, got the sap in their veins, if you will. Kind of this is all like an elaborate metaphor. But the idea is that there is a mimic, a very cuckoo bird kind of mimic of um, of liberalism that is this critical infused postmodernism, or if you want postmodern infused critical, it's the same thing. That's what the critical social justice thing is. And it imitates the various aspects of liberal society while actually being against those. So it's trying to supplant those with its own. And so people have taken up a lot of the tenets that it's been teaching very slowly. Like, well, don't you think the United States has been a little bit too aggressive with its military? Don't you think it's been a bit imperial? What happens if we look at our colonial past? Like, look at Christopher Columbus. Like, we think he's been this great hero. We got fed this story about what a great hero he is, but look at all this awful stuff he did. And then when we look at the way that the American continent was covered, doesn't it? Don't you see how we've been lied to in all of our schooling? And so people have picked up, like, they're having the big theme of the past, like most of my life, has been everything you've ever known was wrong. And they've been fed this kind of
Yeah.
steady diet of the way it's been wrong is this rose colored glasses story. And so the real story is this gross, gritty, unfair, cheating, critical, cynical story that's been left out of the American mythology. And a lot of people have, especially on the left, have imbibed of this critical cynicism, taking up these lines of thought like, well, maybe different groups do have different knowledge. Maybe it really is hard to get to objective truth. Maybe the science isn't the best way to know everything. And these kind of very pessimistic, barely kind of true narratives have, or partially true narratives, have really infiltrated a lot of people's thinking, not least because this started to be mainlined into teacher colleges as early as 1980. So we've been teaching our teachers to teach our children this way for going on 3 or 4 decades now. So more and more and more of this kind of thought has been getting into how the younger generations in particular think. And then older leftists will have picked up quite a bit of it, unless they're Marxists, because Marxists see it as a bourgeois plot to steal the working class away from the left. Or maybe I said that backwards, so steal the left away from the working class. And they're right about that. So pretty much everybody else, though, has kind of like, yeah, we really have been awful to black people through all of our history, and really we probably need to make up for that. So this white guilt kind of very cynical view, wow, it's like only just in my own lifetime that we saw civil rights advances for gay people to where they can get married. Never mind that queer theory, which is the critical social justice analysis of this, was vehemently opposed to gay marriage and is still vehemently opposed to gay marriage. They don't know that. They just see this kind of like rainbow coalition blockade thing, and it's all the same good movement trying to increase people's fair rights. So it's been preying upon and playing upon people's best impulses of fairness and charity of argument and all of this, while churning out decades, reams and reams and reams and decades of scholarship that nobody's been criticizing properly. And this is not new. It's like you could think that what's happening is that there's been like a crocodile coming up very, very slowly out of the water with its mouth wide open, wide open, wide open, wide open, wide open. And then the right moment in history came, George Floyd died, and jaws snapped. And that's where we are right now. So the crocodile's been coming up real slow, real silent, real careful for a long time with its mouth and its teeth right there. And then the moment arose in history that bam, they tried to snap the jaws. And so very rapidly, people's guilt is being played upon. And it's now kind of, we've mentioned your experience as a new Christian, so maybe you can even talk to that. There's a tendency with people who are picking up some new definite. I'm going to very, very vaguely speak about religion as for the average, not that engaged person. Religion is that what you do to be a good person, to feel like you are a good person and to find out how to be a good person. So now you have this whole new definition of what it means to be a good person, and you're starting to get very rapid converts. And at the same time, nobody wants to be the person who's on the wrong side of it. Nobody quite understands it. And so you're having a mass conversion kind of in the lightest sense. Like, for example, a friend of mine wrote to me and said that her kids were kind of getting into all of this stuff. And then she decided to, step in and talk to them and say, well, what do you mean by that? And then their answers are like, I don't know, everybody's saying it. Yeah. That's it.
That's not.
I don't know what it means, but I'm repeating it. That's what good people do. All the good people now, all the people I care about are saying this. So this is what I say now too. I care about this too. I'm into this too. And so we're at this weird inflection point then, where I don't think the ideology has set for a lot of people, but a lot of people have now taken the first step into it. And I mean a lot, like maybe 30 or 40% of the population.
Yeah.
The way I think of it is we've talked about this on the show, is that it's you talk about the crocodile rising up slowly. I also kind of viewed it as there are all these people who were the seeds were planted a long time ago, and maybe they weren't people who paid attention to anything sociopolitical. Maybe they're the type of person who spends all their time online, Instagramming and Facebooking about how they have the perfect family. That's the measure by which they show they're a good person, or maybe it's their church or whatever it is. They're signaling their virtue based on having a great family life and going to the right church. Maybe those people have imbibed some of these beliefs without even realizing it. And now it's like what happened with the George Floyd event, and it could have been any event. That one is just that one took. And those people were like, it's almost like Manchurian Candidate. I think they were all activated. Like the switch came on. It's like, okay, now you have to prove that you're a good person. Now you have to start speaking it. You can't just believe some of this stuff, accept a few of the tenets here and there. Now you have to pledge your allegiance publicly. You need to start having the difficult conversation with your family. You need to post the right things online. And so Carter and I have talked about this. We both know people who it went from being their online presence was pretty not shallow, but just sort of about what their life was like in their family life, or maybe here's my breakfast, shopping, whatever. And now it's constant social justice signaling.
Yep. That's probably exactly correct.